Hi, it's me,
Lavender Honeydew.
coming to you live from under the blanket in my bedroom. As it turns out, that's one of the best places to record audio. This is actually my second time doing the audio for this video because I didn't love it the first time, so I just wanted to make sure everything was really special for my first video for everybody. So today, so you want to be a role player? We're gonna get right into it. Enjoy! Ah yes, D&D, the game of math and nerds and numbers. Have to do something? Well, you gotta roll for it. The crippling gambling addiction is only half the fun, however, because if you look closely in your dungeon guide, you'll see that D&D is branded as the greatest role-playing game ever created. That means you, the player or the DM, will be, you guessed it, playing the role of a character at some point or another. Now, if you're like most of us, your table won't look like a group of professional actors or writers with expensive lighting equipment and the latest in audio engineering. It's more like, oh, there's Jeff from IT, Linda from the biochem lab, Bobby the mechanic. You catch my drift. Everyone is there to have an immersive, fun experience playing one of the greatest tabletop games ever created. But as we sit with Bobby, Linda, oh, that's a Bob's Burgers reference, and Jeff, we have to ask ourselves, how do we get the most out of this experience? How are we ensuring that the countless hours of free labor the Dungeon Master is putting in to create stories and intrigue and encounters is appreciated and explored to its fullest? How are we making sure we're utilizing our character to the fullest of their potential, in and out of combat? Now, as you ask yourself these questions, it's going to be easy to look at your numbers and stats and spell slots and whatever the hell you've got going on, and it's going to feel a lot more comfortable than the daunting, hovering cloud of social interaction hanging above your head. But I promise you it's not that scary. I mean, if I'm not scared, you're not allowed to be scared. No balls. So, what are you going to do about it? Well, you wouldn't have clicked on this video if you didn't want to know, dummy. So here's the first place to start. Grab your pointiest wizard hat, your most mysterious and flowy cloak, or the replica fantasy sword you grabbed at a convention that you still chucked the heft and weight of, lame, and let's get started. Part 1, Getting to Know You.
The character.
The starting point for both PC and DM alike when it comes to interacting with the big, beautiful, frightening world of your campaign setting. For many of us, character creation starts with some hit dice and stats, and only the broadest sense of what class we want our character in question to start out as. Think of this as a blank slate, an empty piece of paper, an unwritten document, the canvas in which you will create anything from a stinky little goblin who eats their own toe cheese, to a classical and serene princess who bakes pies and speaks to the woodland creatures, or anything in between. A great place to start, if you're stumped with ideas, is actually taking a look at the stats you've rolled. In D&D, every skill or part of your being has a quantifiable numerical value that determines how well you can do whatever it is you're trying to do. So, if you're not quite sure on what to do with that big, bleak, daunting canvas, why not start there? Let's say you have an incredibly high constitution. I mean, you've never lost a drinking game in your life. When you feel like you're about to get sick, you dunk your whole body in a vat of Vicks Vapor Rub. You could have two opposing stats that make pretty entertaining and unique combinations as well. High intelligence and low self-esteem. Wait, did I just project? High intelligence and low wisdom means you did not get a school... What am I saying? High intelligence and low wisdom means you did all the schooling in the world, but you still walk down the dark, seedy alley alone in the middle of the night. High charisma and low dexterity can make a charming and beguiling oaf who trips over their own shoelaces whenever they enter a local tavern. Do you get my drift here? You can really do anything. The stats are just a jumping off board. This doesn't have to be the case with everything, but your stats is an incredibly solid way to start getting to know your character, which is a crucial step in being able to roleplay them. Part 2, Race and Class. So we've decided on who you are, but not what you are. In D&D, there are different jobs your character can be called classes. The only thing separating you from the lowly, dirt-shoveling peasants of the world. In 5th edition D&D, we have quite a lot to choose from. There's Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard, Artificer, Electro, Diglett, Nidoran, Minky, and a metric assload of subclass and multi-class options to choose from. Every sourcebook they come out with, they pretty much have extra of these, so I definitely recommend looking at Wizards of the Coast official YouTube channel because they usually do a little snippet video on each new class that comes out. Each class's performance is heavily based on one of the core stats of the character, which are rolled upon creation. Something that heavily influences these stats would be your character's race. From twinkish tieflings to beefcake half-orcs, each race in D&D will have an effect on the ability scores of your character. Now, in a role-playing scenario, you have several unique options to choose from, with however much or little room for interpretation as you'd like. You could play to your character's strengths. Let's say you're a heavenly Aasimar cleric who values healing the party through their boons of celestial grace. Or you could go against the grain and create Honeysuckle Thistlewisk, the gnome barbarian with a taste for ankles. Character backgrounds are also something that can help with fleshing out who you are, and the sourcebooks of the game provide a robust list to choose from. Are you a tarnished noble, seeking to restore the legacy of your family's name? Or a vagabond street urchin who gets by from picking pockets and nabbing stray sweet rolls? All of these aspects can help you determine how your character's past will ultimately shape them into who they are today. It's also important to remember that one of the core takeaways of D&D is having fun. You can sit there and create a character who's completely optimized. I mean, min-max to the min-max. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you also shouldn't feel like you're doing it just to win something. The most important thing to do is make a character you'll enjoy playing for many, many sessions to come. Which brings me to my next point.
Part 3, Teamwork and Improvisation.
Now, baby, teamwork is the bread and butter of D&D. It is a relationship not only between fellow player characters, but between you and the DM as well. Every wild and unscripted moment in D&D has started with a what-if moment, and it's just as important that the DM is the guide to this amazing fantasy world as you are a willing participant to explore, interact with, and change it. Cultivating this relationship is not only important to the story, but to the table as a whole. Maybe you talk with your DM about a backstory you had for a character and it ends up being an explored area of the campaign. By having that conversation, you've not only helped yourself by creating a new role-playing opportunity, but now everyone gets to experience your deep-seated childhood trauma live and in person. Exciting! Teamwork with your fellow players should be ever-present. But
Lavender.
I hear you saying, what if I make a character that doesn't want to work well with others? That's wonderful. There are many alignments to choose from, ranging from chaotic good to lawful evil. But you also need to make a clear line of when you're being in character and when you're being yourself at the table. Like, you know X would do this, but communication with fellow players will be key to achieving your goals and getting the most out of your experience. People will be more understanding than you think, and after all, your PC is probably going to open up to the group after defeating a red dragon together anyway. Improvisation is huge to character development, especially in a game where literally anything can happen. I think it's healthy to go in with an idea of who your character might be, but it's also incredibly important to keep an open mind when it comes to the possibility of change, which is almost a guarantee when you join an adventuring group of 4 or 5 murderous hobos. You're working with your DM and fellow players to help create the most magnificent story ever told, not against them. Now, as someone who has paid $900 American in comedy classes, yeah, I know, I can tell you a thing or two about improv. The most important part? Turning your brain off and allowing yourself to live in the moment. And in the context of D&D, that means immersing yourself in your character's shoes and doing what they would do in a multitude of situations your DM is never going to throw your way faster than you could say, I'd like to hellish rebuke! In improv, there's a key phrase you always come back to called yes and fittingly it's the mantra of D&D. Did you roll a nat 20 on charisma and have wooed the ancient beholder into being your pretty several-eyed waifu? Yes, and now they canonically write you love letters which you receive whenever you stop by a city. Did your druid awaken a squirrel that becomes interested in local politics because of his efforts in the Nut Wars? Yeah, and now he's the mayor of a small seaside town. The possibilities are endless as long as you're willing to stretch your imagination, work that third eye, and create something strange and blessed, and maybe a little cursed with your group.
Part 4, Actually Role-Playing.
Your character's voice! So you've made a character, you've determined your backstory, race, class, and stats, but how do you do it? How do you roleplay? You're not a professional actor, you don't know people at this table. What's happening? Oh god, who the hell are you? It's okay, I promise. The good thing is, unless you're me or another famous person, I can't believe I wrote that in the script, the chances of you being seated at a table full of actors is slim to none. Your fellow PCs and DM are either going to be friends, acquaintances, or somewhere in between, and more often than not, at the start of the campaign, everyone is going to be just as nervous as you are. Armed with the knowledge of who and what you're supposed to be role-playing as, it's time to put everything you've learned thus far to the test. Role-playing, at its core, is similar to acting. You and everyone at the table is already extending their disbelief, using the theater of the mind and the source books provided to weave an epic tale. And you're one of the main characters. The character you've created becomes sort of like a filter. You know how you would react to situations and events thrown your way, but what about your character? Would they strike first and ask questions later? Sleep with every willing goblin in town. The decisions you've made in character creation process will help determine this, and the way you react can be further evolved through the campaign, as you are inevitably changed in ways I cannot begin to describe through the hands of your DM. A helpful way of getting into character can be to develop a certain voice for them. Now, reach back to the days where your body still naturally produced serotonin. Did you ever have a bedtime story read to you, or a reading at a library circle where whoever was narrating used a different voice for a character to make them stand out? Something silly, or loud, or stern, or mumbling, or just something to convey how the character sounded in real life? Giving the character a voice isn't necessary, and I know we're not all professional VAs, but it can be a really helpful and interesting way to get to know your character on another level. Something voice actors do when voicing a certain character is saying a line or dialogue phrase that helps them embody the rest of the speech pattern, tone, volume, or accent they're looking for. For instance, in my friend's campaign I'm currently playing, my character is perhaps the flounciest bard to have ever lived. A mashup of James from Team Rocket, Mettaton from Undertale, and pretty much every hair band to come out of the 80s. I will literally sit there half an hour before every session and go, ooh, just to get into character. Not only is it an effective role-playing tool, but it's also really amusing more often than not. You're bound to have a great time doing it. I will say that while doing an accent, let's make sure we're not being culturally insensitive to anyone. If you're generally unsure, it's always best to ask your fellow players at the table just to make sure you're not offending anyone without realizing it. Oh, and while we're on the topic, let's not forget the power of listening. More often than not, you're going to be with your adventuring party, which also presents several varied and fantastic opportunities for role-playing. We harken back to the first rule of improv, yes and. A role-playing encounter with your peers means building together, going along with a weird or silly idea, and generally having fun. You never know what kind of solutions you might come up with when you allow yourself to listen and respond and work as a team.
Part 5. Inhibitions and closing remarks.
Yeah, I know, we're currently living in the cringe era where it's completely uncool to show any interest in anything at all. I've seen the TikTok compilations, but you have to remember that at the end of the day, we're all just people. I mean, during the pandemic, the number of people playing 5th edition D&D soared, because when the world was hurting the most, the thing we needed was each other. We fled to Discord and Zoom and held our virtual sessions for a few hours at a time just to get away from everything that was going on for a while. In those wild and fantastical fantasy worlds, we feel real things like friendship and fear and admiration for one another. Intrinsic human emotions that transcend the pages of Wizards of the Coast and hit us right where we feel it the most. I mean, that's how I started playing D&D, and since then it's become a huge part of my life. I have met some of the nicest, most creative people in my life through this game. Lifelong friends that I'll have even when we're not rolling for initiative. Role-playing is just a skill that helps make that game even better, and it's okay to be afraid to go all in. But you shouldn't let your fear of being judged stop you. You deserve to have fun and live your life, beautifully and honestly. And in experiences you can achieve that in, like D&D, well, you should hold on to that feeling whenever you can get it. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been
Lavender Honeydew.
Signing off. Bye-bye!
Lavender, 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 honeydew, ba-ba-bum. Lavender, 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 honeydew. Lavender, 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 honeydew.